Okay, well, welcome to the November 17th edition of Going Viral at goingviral.news. My name is Jim Dingman. This is being broadcast from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we have on air with us tonight Ken Aaorn in California, Alex Stavoulopoliz, and Steve Jonas, and myself in the East Coast. We're going to be joined later by Michael Jankowitz. And first, I wanted to start with a little clip from Steve Bannon coming out of the courthouse after he was read the riot act by the judge, and this is a few days ago, but it's just sort of an interesting way to let's just hear what Mr. Bannon had to say. His judge and Mr. Bannon, of course, is filled with piss and vinegar. We'll be able to see how far he has his tongue up Mr. You-Know-Who's ass, and it's going to be an interesting little thing here. But this is Mr. Bannon a few days ago coming out of the courthouse in Virginia.
Leaving. We'll see if he has anything more to say to reporters here.
Yeah, Bannon here. Prosecutors didn't seek to detain him before his trial that, of course, we know is coming. No bond was set, and his official arraignment is next week. But we heard from him this morning where he says that this, speaking about the proceedings today, was noise, as he called it. Of course, Bannon revels in this attention. Let's see what we hear from Steve Bannon.
Where's David?
Right here. Listen, ordinarily, we don't like to comment on the case, but I have the obligation to respond to something that Attorney General Garland wrote. Attorney General Garland wrote, he's promised Justice Department employees would show the American people by word and deed Justice Department adheres to the rule of law, follows the facts in the law, and pursues equal justice under the law. I assume here you can take off your masks?
Do it.
Okay.
It's a free country.
There is nothing about this case that reflects the pursuit of the equal justice under the law. This thing was a scam from the beginning. The committee that was convened here was convened exclusively of people who have made prejudgments and announced them publicly. The chair of the committee sued President Trump personally, and before he was even appointed to his position, determined and put in writing that President Trump was responsible for the events of January 6th. This is not an investigative committee. There's nothing for him to investigate when he's made a prejudgment. We have other members of the committee who announce their prejudgments well in advance. It's not equal justice under the law, Mr. Garland, to charge a matter like this criminally. The holder of the privilege in this case, executive privilege, invoked the privilege. Mr. Bannon is a layperson. When the privilege has been invoked by the purported holder of privilege, he has no choice but to withhold the documents. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Mr. Bannon acted as his lawyer counseled him to do by not appearing and by not turning over documents in this case. He didn't refuse to comply. He made quite clear that if a court ordered him to comply, he would do that. But he had an obligation to honor the privilege that was invoked. And in terms of prosecuting this criminally, it violates settled Department of Justice policy that's binding on the executive branch. It is outrageous that a criminal charge was brought in this case. It is a misdemeanor, but it's being treated as if it were a capital case. Mr. Bannon takes this very seriously. It's outrageous what the government did. The principles of equal justice under law that Attorney General Garland speaks about are vitally important to all of us. And we all lose as Americans when they're selectively used and when we violate that principle.
You see these signs right here and the guys over here saying insurrection and all that? That's what this country's about. It's freedom of speech. They got their opinions. We have our opinions. Okay? Hang on. They have their opinions. I'm telling you right now, this is going to be the misdemeanor from hell for Merrick Garland, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden ordered Merrick Garland to prosecute me from the White House lawn when he got off Marine One. And we're going to go on the offense. We're tired of playing defense. We're going to go on the offense on this and stand by. By the way, you should understand Nancy Pelosi is taking on Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. She ought to ask Hillary Clinton how that turned out for them, okay? We're going on the offense. Stand by.
You should be outraged if he ever faced that possibility as an American. There is nothing criminal about any conduct that occurred in this case. And when we respond to Merrick Garland, we say apply the law equally. They don't have. Who else did they prosecute for invoking executive privilege in a criminal prosecution? Read the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel letters. It's unconstitutional according to their own opinions from some real luminaries, including, by the way, read the Office of Legal Counsel opinion by Eric Holder for the Obama administration, the Fast and the Furious case. This is unheard of, to force a person to violate the invocation of executive privilege. By the way, I mean, the court, of course, hasn't ruled yet in President Trump's case, in Trump versus Thompson, on whether executive privilege applies. But even beyond that, the Office of Legal Counsel opinions make clear that it applies to discussions with former government officials, and that makes sense. It makes sense because we often see former officials kept in the loop that the president needs to consult with. And whatever you happen to think President Trump talked about at the time, that's what executive privilege exists for, so that people can speak freely with the president, talk about strategy matters, and talk about national security and other important matters.
By the way, not just Trump people and not just conservatives. Every progressive and every liberal in this country that likes freedom of speech and liberty, okay, should be fighting for this case. That's why I'm here today. For everybody, I'm never going to back down, and they took on the wrong guy this time, okay? They took on the wrong guys.
And then cite the privilege question by question.
Because he was instructed by his attorney not to show up in Congress. A layperson has to follow his attorney's advice, in my view at least. When he's faced with a subpoena, he doesn't know anything about legal process otherwise. He relies on a lawyer, and the lawyer gave you the advice. And I must say, relies on the Office of Legal Counsel opinions, which very clearly say that he need not show up.
Did he get bad advice or what?
No,
I
don't think executive privilege.
There's no other choice. Once the privilege is invoked, what would the choice be? Show up and testify. And by the way, they asked to have members, if he were to testify, to have those people invoking the privilege, a representative of the person invoking the privilege, present, just to be able to monitor it and make an objection if a privileged matter came up. They refused to allow that.
By the way, if the administrative state wants to take me on, bring it. Because we're here to fight this, and we're going to go on offense. And you stand by. You see how we're going to go on offense, okay? Nancy Pelosi, Merrick Garland, Joe Biden, the whole, all of them.
What he means,
okay?
what he means by offense is we're going to challenge this affirmatively. We're going to fight to defend his rights and to defend your rights also.
Your rights.
Quite frankly, I represented the American Civil Liberties Union for more than 20 years and all the litigation they had in Alabama. This is an issue that the American Civil Liberties Union ought to be on our side with.
Okay, let's bounce.
All right, we got to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, so there we have Mr. Bannon invoking the ACLU, invoking the fact that he's defending people's freedom of expression. Progressives should join in. Of course, Mr. Bannon, the day before the event occurred, says, strap in, guys. Get ready for the ride. So, Steve, what do you think of this? I mean, what do you make of this latest in this Mishigosh mess here?
Well, there's method and there's substance. The method is classic Trump. Always attack, never defend, which Trump learned from Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn learned it from Joe McCarthy. This is a classic right-wing tactic, which they use over and over again. They really have no case here because Bannon is not covered by executive privilege, even if the courts were to rule that Trump has executive privilege and can prevent the transfer of the documents from the National Archive to the Congress. But even if they were to do that, Bannon never had an official position in the Trump government, and Bannon was not associated with Trump beyond about, when was he? Trump threw him out around, I think, middle of 2017, 2017. And then Bannon went to Europe for 3 years to organize fascist parties in Europe. Now he's back and he is trying very hard. And I think he has every good chance of succeeding to organize a fascist party here. I'm very worried about what's going to happen in this country down the road. And Bannon is going to be at the lead up. I think so that's about Bannon and all of them who have refused to respond to subpoenas. The question which is asked infrequently, which I think has to be asked over and over again of all these people, including Trump, is what are you hiding? What do you have to hide? Why don't you want to speak out? If nothing happened, in the White House to provoke a clearly illegal action, which included violence, which included the deaths of police officers. What do you have to hide? Why do you want to cover up? What are the records? There are apparently records. Jonathan Karl has had a journalist apparently has had access to some of these records, that this stuff was being organized. But if it wasn't, let's say Jonathan Karl was wrong, everything was peaceful. When Bannon made that statement on January 5th about wait for the explosion to occur the next day, he was just, that was just rhetoric. He didn't really mean it. He didn't know anything. So I think we have to, that's how you have to be, not to defend. Let's not defend the right of Congress to issue civil contempt charges when somebody refuses to testify. The Congress sent to jail a number of left-wingers in the late 40s and the early 50s into the mid 50s for contempt of Congress because they refused to answer questions taking the Fifth Amendment. Bannon, none of these people have claimed the Fifth Amendment privilege here, including a man who was my mentor growing up, a man named Dr. Edward K. Barsky. I think I mentioned that before on this show. He was at one time the commander of the whole of the medical unit for the International Brigade in Spain. And Eddie went to jail for refusing to, what was the question he was refusing to answer? Give us, HUAC wanted a list of the contributors to the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee, and Eddie wouldn't give it. Of course, they already had it, but so there's plenty of precedent for this on stuff that is much less serious than what Bannon, Trump, Pompeo, and all the rest of them were plotting.
All right. Well, let me hold on, Ken and Alex, for a second. I want to just deal with what was the headline today, and that, of course, is what happened on Capitol Hill when they censored Gosar. This is the news hour talking about this tonight.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
It was the first time the U.S. House of Representatives censured one of its own in more than a decade. And as we reported, when it took that step today against Republican Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona, it was divided, nearly along party lines. Lisa Desjardins has been following this all day, and she joins me now. So, Lisa, hello. Tell us more about what was in this video that he posted, and why did Democrats feel he should be censured?
This video was posted by Representative Gosar on his Twitter feed and other places, and it stayed up for 3 days. Now, I want to first explain to our viewers, we're not going to show this video. It does depict violence, but we do want people to understand what we're talking about. So we're going to show some images that help people understand what this is. First of all, this video had a series of sort of frenzy, very fast-pacing flashes of images like this one, some anime Japanese characters, as well as some photos of migrants on the border, different images of that. But the one getting the most attention has been this one. That is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, her face imposed on a character known as a Titan, which is a bad guy in this anime world. Now, what is that in front of her? That is actually a depiction of Representative Gosar carrying swords, attacking her. Now, she's not the only high-ranking official to be attacked in this video, depicted this way. Also, at the end of the video is this image of a character with knives and swords attacking President Biden himself. So Democrats said in their censure resolution, this has gone too far. This is violence against public officials and members of Congress, and they voted largely, all the Democrats and 2 Republicans, that he needed to be censured, which means he had to face the House of Representatives, and also he has been stripped of his committee positions.
And we see that there were only 2 Republicans who voted with the Democrats on the censure, Congresswoman Cheney, Congressman Kinzinger. How is Congressman Gosar defending what he did, and what about Republican Party leadership? What are they saying?
Right. From the House floor today, we heard two very different looks at what's happening here. I want to first talk about what Representative Ocasio-Cortez said is going on. Here's what she said on the House floor today.
It's pretty cut and dry. Does anyone in this chamber find this behavior acceptable? Would you allow depictions of violence against women, against colleagues? Would you allow that in your home? Do you think this should happen on a school board? In a city council? In a church? And if it's not acceptable there, why should it be accepted here?
For his part, Gosar has said he was trying to be metaphorical, that he was going against Biden and Democratic policies, especially on immigration. So I want to look at what he said he was doing today on the floor, and then also what Republicans said in response, including leader Kevin McCarthy, saying Democrats are the problem. Here are their two sound bites from them.
I voluntarily took the cartoon down, not because it was itself a threat, but because some thought it was. Out of compassion for those who generally felt offense, I self-censored.
For Democrats, this vote isn't about a video, it's about control. That's the one and only thing Democrats are interested in.
And Republicans, by and large, supported Gosar. They don't support him behind the scenes. They know he's a controversial figure. They have problems, in fact, with his associations with white nationalists in the past. But they say here Democrats went too far, that they sort of jumped the process in this situation.
So, Lisa, you are on the Hill all the time. What does this mean for how things are going to work up there?
I want to say Republicans and Democrats alike, by and large, behind the scenes, see Representative Gosar sometimes as a joke. I heard a Republican today told me they see him as a whack job, someone they don't respect. However, this was a serious video, and Democrats who have just come through January 6th, like all of us, are very concerned about messages of violence. And remember, in the last 10 years alone, Judy, we've had 2 members of Congress shot, Gabrielle Giffords and then Steve Scalise, because of an atmosphere in this country. Politics becoming violent. There is real concern that we are now back in that place. We have certainly been, we were after January 6th, a lot of tension and concern tonight in Congress.
Very worrying. Lisa Desjardins, thank you very much.
All right, so we have, and I understand tonight Gosar put the cartoon back up there on his Twitter feed. And so we have 2 things here. We have the gauntlet being thrown by Bannon, which is of course no surprise. And then we have Gosar basically, giving them the middle finger and putting the thing back up there on his Twitter feed after he was stripped of his committees in the House today. So, Kenny, your comments about this stuff. You got on mute, Ken.
Yeah. I want to forget about Bannon. He's rude and that's inappropriate. It didn't even have to be not Bannon, the second guy, whatever his name is, the Republican. Gosar. Yeah, Gosar. That's rude and inappropriate. Even if it wasn't violence, it could have been defecation or some lewd thing. That's street crap. It's like graffiti, and it violates the concept of civility in the House or the Senate. And I understand if you watch British parliaments, they scream and holler at each other, but I think they try to do it with proper diction. And they're still screaming, but they're maintaining a certain amount of civility. But the interesting thing with Bannon and all of that is it just reminds me of this thing with Joseph Biden's daughter. I forgot her name. I think it starts with an A. Amy, I think. Is it? She supposedly lost or had stolen a diary that she kept. And it supposedly wound up in the hands of Project Veritas. So the FBI raided Project Veritas. And within an hour, the New York Times posted an article about it before, there was time for it to leak. So there seems to be a connection between the president, the AG, and the FBI. And I don't understand how anybody could possibly excuse pulling in the security forces of the United States to recover a diary unless it had, secret launch codes or something that jeopardize national security. And surprise, surprise, even the ACLU was very upset about it because like him or not, Project Veritas is essentially a journalistic organization. And I don't think anything he's ever done, right, you might not agree with his political views, but I don't think he's ever been sued for libel or slander or anything successfully. So I think his journalistic integrity hasn't been successfully challenged. So, but it's up the other side of it, which sort of supports what that lawyer was saying. This is just a political act to put some people on a pedestal and put them they've been, the Democrats or half the party there have been using, and the people on this panel keep using Donald Trump as an iconic evil demon to keep attacking and blaming everything on. And so they just keep going after him. But the media isn't covering anything about the FBI raiding a journalist's and taking all of his material just because they accused him of acquiring a diary, like the Pentagon Papers or something. He didn't publish anything about the diary because he couldn't. He made a statement that he didn't publish anything about the diary because he couldn't confirm that it was her diary. So he didn't do anything with it, and he turned it over to the courts. But I think before the raid. But anyhow, it's there's a certain amount of executive manipulation, which we do have to tolerate because sometimes you got to break some of the rules to make things happen, like compelling people to get the vaccine and so forth, or pay their taxes or whatever. But it shouldn't be directed towards political ends. And I just think that the FBI going after the diary, maybe there was something in the diary that was violent, attacked the repute of the Joe Biden, the father. I don't know. Same thing happened with Hunter Biden's laptop, which supposedly had some scurrilous material in it. And it kind of disappeared. Nobody talked about it. The media just dropped it. They dropped the thing with the Jeff Epstein. Was it Epstein? Yeah, I think so. What? He hung himself with a toilet paper? Okay. And the only other thing was Bannon or Bannon, whatever his name is. I think he's got a good chance because when that lawyer turned around and left, I saw he was wearing a yarmulke. So he's got a good attorney.
All right. Well, anyway, let me just before I bring Alex on, there are other headlines today. There were two men who were convicted in Malcolm X's assassination, and they're to be exonerated on Thursday due to a new investigation by Cyrus Vance's DA's office in New York City. So we'll see what happens with that. Biden has been in Michigan today as he's selling his Buy Back America plan, and he's lauding electric cars. Now, remember, what's interesting about that breakdown we heard last night on this show from our comrades in Australia was basically there wasn't as much money being allocated to electric cars than we think. So that's an interesting little dilemma on it. In the Ahmed Arbery trial in Georgia, the man who fatally shot him says he feared for his life in the struggle for the shotgun. And another story that has appeared is the Pentagon issued an Inspector General report about the January 6th insurrection, and basically they're questioning the D.C. National Guard commanding general, who basically said that he had not been ordered to come in to send his forces to Capitol Hill. And supposedly in the chronology of the report, which is such as today, there are two examples of the timeline being different from what we were told when that Major General testified in front of the commission a few months ago. And finally, our favorite QAnon rioter, the one who came in dressed as a Viking, Mr. Jacob Chansley, he's been sentenced for 41 months for his role in the Capitol riot. That's the guy who, was acting like he was landing in England in one of the Viking raids. But anyway, Alex, come on, let's hear what you have to say about what you just heard. And then, of course, be ready to share with us some of the stories you've dug up.
Yeah, so on Bannon, nobody said he wasn't shrewd about politics, and obviously knows how to play the usual right-wing talking points, like Steve said. So, and as well as interesting, I agree with Steve's point about, he didn't have an official position at the White House at the time. So how can he, again, somebody can assert executive privilege from Trump's position, but Steve Bannon can't, because again, he had no official, certainly wasn't appointed to anything. He was he had been an advisor before, so maybe then you could argue he had executive privilege. So on Representative Gosar, I mean, it's, I guess, I mean, I guess he doesn't care about he probably is going to do better in the next time in 2022. Though I'm sure his constituents I'm sure he comes from I believe he comes from a pretty right-wing district, the state where he's from. So, this is this is exactly what he wants. And obviously, if he's willing to, put such a video out, then this is exactly what he expected and maybe what he wanted. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing to expect otherwise. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Because remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene put out all her stuff, she actually got millions of dollars coming in. So I bet you Gosar will have the same effect. But anyway, Alex, you have some stories to share with us, don't you?
Right here, me.
All right.
Can I just make
a
a
clarification?
quick comment on the Gosar thing before we?
Sure.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Go on, Steve.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just watch the clip again if you can. Not of Gosar. Well, let me just make two comments. Gosar is preparing to be on offense on the Trumpite equivalent and the Republican-fascist equivalent of the Night of the Long Knives. And if you don't know what that is, folks, listeners, you can look it up. I'm sure everybody who's on this panel knows what the Night of the Long Knives was. The other thing is, McCarthy is a classic example of what I talked about when I was talking about Bannon. Always attack, never defend. What McCarthy didn't say anything about a member of his party advocating murdering a member of the opposition party. He said it's all the Democrats' fault. Always attack, never defend, and that's something that our side has to begin to do. Of course, I've been saying that for about the last 20 years, and so far I haven't had any effect. So I'm not too sanguine about that happening.
Well, I have to tell you,
Alex.
I have to tell you, Steve. That's my policy in Pacifica: attack first, ask questions later. But anyway, go on, Alex.
All right. So first, I found this interesting at South Front. This with developments in Ethiopia, where again the Tigrayan TPLF People's Liberation Force, they've now pushed pretty far south towards the capital Addis Ababa. But more importantly, they've again kind of cut this major trade route, which again obviously goes off to Somalia and Djibouti over the border, and obviously is their outlet to the sea essentially. So obviously that's going to have some economic impact. Of course, we know the Security Council, UN Security Council, called for a ceasefire back on November 5th. But so far that's not, I guess the TPLF feel like they're on a roll. So why would they stop? So also yesterday, President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, from that famous family, arrived in Addis Ababa to talk with the Prime Minister Abiy. So what help the Kenyans may provide, I don't know. But again, that's obviously something to be interested in. Again, they're not too far from the capital if they march down this. Yeah.
Alex, what are the green areas on the map?
I think that's maybe ISIS or some other group. Ammonia Liberation Army control that's there. Yeah.
The green is the Oromo Liberation Army. We should also add that the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, has also come into the picture in recent days, trying to secure a ceasefire. But go on.
Right. But first thing, kind of keeping with focusing on Africa, there was this that happened yesterday. We didn't get time to get into last night, which was interesting. Which is, I hadn't heard about these that they're proceeding with elections, and one of the side is fighting against the government. General Haftar just announced that he wants to participate, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
And who is he, Alex?
He's let me get through the. He's a former CIA asset in general. He fought against Gaddafi in the 90s, and then he's not really pro-American anymore because now the Russians and the Saudis and the UAE are backing him again. He's in charge of basically one of the two major factions in Libya that have been trying to. He was successful for some time and was marching on Tripoli and looked like he might, take the whole country. But then with the Turks sent support and some of their, fundamentalist jihadi foot soldiers from Syria to Libya, and they're able to stop his offensive. So now it looks like he's looking for a political route to take over the country instead. So this is.
I heard that they had enlisted Field Marshal Rommel in their
right
around Tripoli.
Yeah.
He's portrayed himself as a military strongman who can unite Libya after years of conflict. But Khalifa Haftar has taken off his military uniform and announced his bid to become Libya's first democratically elected president.
Elections will be the best way and best path for Libya to get back its place amongst the countries of the world. I declare myself a nominee for the presidential elections, not seeking power, not finding a place, but to lead our people towards a better future and towards welfare.
In April 2019, Haftar led a 14-month military offensive to seize Tripoli from the internationally recognized government. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced and the city's infrastructure damaged. He's been widely accused of committing war crimes. Libya has Africa's largest oil reserves, but since the revolution that toppled longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has been politically divided and engulfed in violence. 10 years on from the revolution, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, Muammar's second son, has re-emerged on the Libyan political scene, and on Sunday, he applied to register as a presidential candidate. Saif is wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, including attacks on civilians and peaceful protesters. Presidential elections are scheduled for next month, but Libya's rival legislative houses have yet to agree on a constitutional framework to hold the vote, and the Election Commission is accused of helping certain candidates, an allegation it denies.
We completely reject the candidacy of criminals like Saif Gaddafi and Khalifa Haftar in the upcoming elections. We call on the Electoral Commission to reject the applications of any criminals. We hold them legally responsible.
Some officials agree.
The Libyan people will only be satisfied when they choose who they want to rule them through elections. They will never concede the right to vote. But they came out with laws tailored for certain individuals, and we will never accept that.
Less than 6 weeks before scheduled nationwide elections, Libya is still deeply divided, and despite international pressure, many are concerned the vote may be delayed. Malik Traina, Al Jazeera.
So that's, again, very interesting. Again, someone, they're going to allow someone again, who's been in one of the major parties in the Civil War, allow him to actually run for president, allow Gaddafi's son, who again is wanted for international war crimes, allow him to run for president. I mean, on the other, obviously some people might think, it should be blocked, they should be arrested, prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. But, maybe this is a way to kind of end the war finally, allow them to participate. And, But of course, then, since Haftar literally has his own army, maybe if he loses, he's not going to go along. Maybe just keep on fighting. So it's, very confused as to, what people's intent are. But yeah, it's quite interesting. Again, Gaddafi's son wants to run for president here too. So I'm sure Jim in particular who knows a lot about Libya, has some thoughts. But maybe Steve, do you have any comments?
If we were going to, talk about what happened with the supposed murder of the U.S. ambassador, I would have some comments on that, but that's really off this particular subject, so I won't go there. I think I've talked about it before. Anyway, I was just wondering if in the previous picture was that Angela Merkel.
Yeah, I think that was from before. Well, she's still technically chancellor, so I don't know if that was, although it might, here it's November. Oh, yeah. So this is pretty recent. So, yeah, she's still, they haven't seated a new government, so she's still the head of state for Germany.
Right.
So I guess she's
a prime minister, not chief minister, not head of state.
Right, that's true, yeah.
President in Germany.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. All right, well, since Mike hasn't said anything yet, do you have any thoughts about what you think is going on in Libya?
Yeah, but impunity. It's, I don't know. I tend to see the big picture here. So, I don't know what's going to happen with Libya, and at present, I'm always just gathering material about the subject I wanted to bring up, which was the flooding in British Columbia and Washington State, the storm. But I wish Libya well. That's all.
Right. Well, Jim, then, to finish us off on this subject.
Well, let me throw in an arbitrary left. What do you call it?
A map, or you want to...
No, not a map. Just an arbitrary question for the group here. Which is the most stable theocracy, Islamic theocracy in the Middle East? Any history? It's Turkey, isn't it?
Stable.
It's not a theocracy. Oh, theocracy, yeah.
Yeah, a nation run basically from a religious viewpoint. Even
I could say the Saudis. I mean,
the Saudis are the most stable, but okay.
I mean, they've had the same family running it since the 19th century.
It seems like they're still going through, that whole area is still going through tribalistic wars and the different factions of the religious contention. Like Jim was talking about the other day, those religious groups that operate solely on the first 3 years of Islam. That's what I see here mostly. Like, it isn't a question of vending machines and cell phones and elevators. It's got to be a tradition, a long-standing tradition of civility, which we used to have in the Ottoman Empire, but somehow it fell apart after they fell. Okay, that's
also it depends upon what you're calling a theocracy. It is relative. There are countries that are run exclusively on religion, but then there are countries that are run partially on religion. God knows, maybe, no pun intended, maybe the United States is, there are people in the United States who want it to be a partial theocracy. Mm-hmm. And many of them had a lot more power during 4 years of Donald Trump. Yeah, I mean, it's relative to what's a theocracy. In other words, Turkey has become more of a theocracy in the past few years, but prior to that, it was less of a theocracy. Mm-hmm. So it's a relative term right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to Jim for the final. Come on, Jim, bring it in on Libya. What's going on there?
Well, Haftar's quite a character. He has a whole bunch of cases against him in Alexandria in U.S. federal court. Because people forget he lived in the United States. Yeah. He was indeed a CIA asset and brought back into play. But Haftar, of course, gets aid from Russia, China, the United Arab Emirates, he is. I think he even gets some support from Egypt, although I'm not
And
positive.
from the Saudis, yeah.
From the Saudis, but the UAE is the interesting little Sparta, as General Mattis calls them. They actually introduced a draft into Abu Dhabi, into the UAE back in 2014, because the person ruling it, he went to Sandhurst, Mohammed bin Zayed. So he's, the military of the UAE is deployed rather vigorously throughout the entire area, and used in Yemen. They're fighting in Somalia, and they're also supporting the particular faction of Haftar. Now there are several factions inside Libya, and the reason why they're doing this now is anybody who holds an official office has to resign 3 months before an election. So that's why Haftar, is announcing that he's going to, run for office, because it's 3 months before the election, or more than that. So he has to sort of resign himself to that. The other thing that's interesting is that this fighting is interrelated to the other fighting going on further south in sub-Saharan Africa, because all these different countries are involved. Chad is involved. Chad is involved in the situation fighting Boko Haram, fighting in Al-Shabaab and Somalia. There's this whole pan-African kind of sweep throughout the entire subcontinent of all these little campaigns going on that, when you look at them, they're all based locally on very specific local conditions that have to do with the inequalities in their own societies. That's certainly the case in Nigeria, Mali, Somalia, and in Mozambique, which I've been looking at very carefully, the fighting up in the northeastern part of Mozambique. But we'll see what happens with this. This is a pretty interesting development. Haftar, of course, is quite a character, a warlord, if you will, and one that is sort of on his own trajectory now. I don't know how much you could say he's a CIA asset anymore. He's become his own asset.
Okay, Ken, so you want me to do another one, or should we go to Mike's thing on the flooding?
Go on. Let's hear Mike.
So, Mike, you want to,
if
you have, share screen to show it.
What's happened is this storm in on the West Coast has basically pretty much paralyzed British Columbia, including, most importantly, Vancouver and the port of Vancouver. And this is a case where climate change meets supply chain problems dead on, and the intermixing, the interconnection of the economy and climate change is now readily apparent. Basically, the Trans-Canada Highway has been cut in many places, literally broken, as well as a couple of other highways. All three main arteries into Vancouver from the interior have now been disrupted. So nothing as of now, unless something's happened in the past few minutes, nothing is moving in and out of Vancouver, except to, the immediate surrounding area. Also, northern British Columbia and Washington State is affected by this, also heavily affected. A couple of towns have been washed away, and it is also the results of the storm are directly related to the wildfires just a few months ago, because the wildfires actually burnt out the land, enabling more flooding and quicker flooding. So some of the towns, one of the towns, the town of Merritt in BC, in British Columbia, has effectively had to be evacuated. A couple of Abbotsford also, a large part of the town had to be evacuated. I'm sure we all heard about the 200 some odd motorists that were literally stranded. When I say stranded, they had to be rescued, airlifted out from their cars, from their vehicles, because they were caught whether the road broke up and then they were caught in the rains and the mudslides and et cetera, et cetera. But the port of Vancouver also, which already had some backup, same as the port of Los Angeles, now is going to have much more backup. The Canadian National and the Canadian Pacific Railways are temporarily disrupted. They're hoping to get it back, getting them back in operation in a couple of days. But again, the railway has been cut in several places. I mean, it almost sounds like a war movie here. Basically, all the supplies that are coming in and out of Vancouver, which is one of the two major ports on the West Coast, is now basically pretty much at a standstill, except for the stuff that was already there. So the damage that was done, if you look, I don't know if you can get any photos of the actual highways that were actually.
I got photos. I can throw them up.
Yeah.
Go on.
Some of these highways were snapped, literally snapped in half, snapped down the middle. So how long it's going to take to repair them?
Let's see the photos.
Moving through, forgetting about cars, just getting trucks carrying goods going through. The railways is supposedly about 150 railway cars that are just idle in Vancouver, can't move east. And again, nothing can move west to be shipped out of Vancouver. So also ironically, the pipeline is even disrupted. That may not be a bad thing, but the pipeline had to be shut down as well because of flooding. Yeah, that's a photo of Highway 1. And again, these towns, many of whom were nearly devastated by the wildfires, have now been smacked again with this massive flooding. There are hundreds, if not by this time, probably thousands of people have had to be evacuated. So to me, this is a situation that basically says, okay, climate change, you can say climate change, is something that's more gradual. People will claim that, but this is something which is a result of climate change, because this is considered, is being called the storm of the century in British Columbia, for British Columbia. And that's after the wildfires of the century just a few months ago. So here's a situation where climate change is actually directly affecting the economic life of North America. I mean, this is also having an effect on the United States, the supply chains there. A lot of this stuff that comes in through Vancouver goes to the United States. So we're probably going to be seeing prices rise in both Canada and the United States for goods that are backed up or can't get through. In Vancouver, they're basically on the same type of, as far as goods go, they're almost in the same situation they were in the middle of the pandemic. In the worst part of the pandemic, people are hoarding goods because they know there's nothing coming in and out. The government's trying to, the BC government is trying to tell people, no, you don't have to buy 4 dozen eggs, 1 dozen will do. We'll get this open soon enough. But it's creating some, a certain amount of panic also in Seattle and lower parts of Washington State. The CF, I left messages. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten any information back from the Canadian forces, but Canadian forces troops supposedly are on their way to assist in the evacuations, the rescues, and in mitigating the damage from the flooding and the mudslides. Right. And
like down here off to our left is usually just a little stream. You can see it along the side of the highway here. It's just a lake now.
And this is from rainfall?
Rainfall, storms, mudslides, and snow. And we're not even in the middle of winter. Primarily from rainfall and
When was the last time they had this kind of phenomenon?
Well, it's not the only time they've had this kind of phenomenon, but something on this scale. Again, this not in the 21st century, and I don't know if anything this big, to this extent. This may be the biggest and the most expensive.
Well, for them, I mean, we've had this unfortunately going on for years, but it's too bad. It's really terrible to see this. What impresses me is the distance of this flooding. Miles and miles and miles.
That's where it's really massive area that's been flooded out. Some towns, and some of these towns are not small towns. We're not talking about a couple of thousand people. 50 or 100,000 people living like that have to almost completely evaporate. And again, no highway, no transport except, of course, by air. And we know how minimal that can be. And there, of course, you can see some of the obvious traffic backup.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to see more of this.
Yeah. Remember, this is where, I mean, we're in a storm season, but we're really on the cusp of it. We haven't gotten into the massive snowfalls that can also cause jam ups and cut off the highway railroads. So it's the extent and the frequency that we're dealing with right now. And again, this coming after these major wildfires. To me, it's an undeniable effect of climate change, and an undeniable portrait of the connection between climate change. For example, the connection between climate change and the economy, and one that's hit very close to home for me, but should be close to home for all of us. Because
well, Canada's no exception. This is going on all over the world, unfortunately. Yeah. But anyway, let's move on to what your next piece, Alex. And you're listening to Going Viral at goingviral.news. We've just been looking at the impact of floods and rain in the northwestern part of the United States and British Columbia and Canada. And now we're going to talk about a drone strike.
Right. So I know that Steve regularly reads the Times, so I assume he's read it, and I know Jim's read it. But this is an in-depth investigation the Times has done over the past year or so into this drone strike that happened in Syria in 2019, where, probably more than 60, as many as 80 civilians were basically blown up by US F-15 Strike Eagle. And but it goes further because there, of course, was a cover-up from the beginning. And the only reason this has come to light is because of a number of Air Force, in particular, whistleblowers who first tried to go through all the way to the Congress and the Senate, I guess the Armed Services Committee, to get an investigation started into this war crime, because that's what it is. And obviously, well, when that route didn't get anywhere, they went to the Times, who again did a lot of reporting and confirmed the story. So we can go, and they have some good graphics to go along with it. So we can go through all of it. So, okay, so this all took place in the small town of, small town of Baghouz, kind of towards the end of the U.S. campaign against ISIS, where that group had been kind of reduced to this small little enclave near that town. And where, in combination with, basically the Syrian Defense Forces, were mostly Kurds, were, drones and Air Force, well, our planes were providing support for them, and so this all happened. So again, this strike took place against a large crowd of women and children huddled against this one riverbank, and we'll see what it looked like. And here's a photo of the area and after some of the bombing. All right, so again, this all took place on March 18th, 2019. There'll also be some discussion of kind of the confused military command, overlapping command relationships that contributed to this happening. So again, what literally happened again is first, American F-15 Strike Eagle dropped a 500-pound bomb, and then another one dropped a 2,000-pound bomb. Again, so it was, well, it sounds like it's what they call a double tap, where they, drop a bomb and then drop another one to, get any survivors. So, So again, everything was conducted from a distance in Qatar, again, where, the U.S. Central Command has, its headquarters. So again, at the time, one from there literally asked, who dropped that? And from the beginning, they said, we just bombed 50 and probably killed more than 50 women and children. So they knew from the beginning it was, essentially a war crime. And that they had bombed, we'll see if, we can question whether it was deliberate or just in confusion. But they did, again, essentially drop just on, almost entirely on civilians. Not a military target. Again, we'll see it has to do with the confusion in the area. So again, the total death toll at the time was reported to be 70. Again, and so this is one of later on, though, they say this is the third largest civilian casualty event in our fighting in Syria against ISIS. So this was about, which again says what's number 2 and number 1. We killed 100 people at one time. Well, obviously something like that. So they don't mention those. What are the worst cases? And there'll be some discussion, of course, that the actual reported death toll is obviously way too low, and we've killed a lot more civilians and thousands of civilians in the kind of the NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch that investigate these kinds of things. So again, we'll see here at literally at the time, it was flagged again as a possible war crime, and there should have been an investigation launched. And some people tried to launch an investigation, but of course, what happened instead was the cover-up began from the beginning. Again, reports, delayed, sanitized, and classified. And literally, after they took the area, chasing ISIS out, the crime scene was essentially bulldozed. And again, they never tried to either identify who ordered this, who's responsible, who should be prosecuted. Okay, so again, they tried to. Some of the lawyers involved tried to call on the Inspector General to have an inquiry and a report, which was, stalled, stripped of any discussion of the strike. Okay, so again, here, so again, actually, quote, some people have been willing to go on the record, give their names about what they saw, which again, of course, ends their military careers, so they're being quite brave to do this, of course. So again, here we have Gene Tate, one of the whistleblowers, saying, the leadership just buried this, nobody wanted anything to do with it. And of course, again, what it says about the system, which of course is that, the system covers up these kinds of things and always has, always will. Okay, so again, tells a little bit about Mr. Tate here. Again, so he's a former Navy guy, worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency, the NTC, Counterterrorism Center. Okay, and obviously, he lost his job, which one reason he's willing to talk about this. But certainly, it's it's a brave thing that he's doing because again, he's obviously going to get shut out of pretty much any national security related job in the future, which again is of course what he's educated and trained to do. So he's not going to have a good future for him, and he's all right. So again, so the Times has spoken to a lot of people, gotten classified documents, interviewed some of the other whistleblowers, and again, had anonymous sources from within the DoD give them confirmation. All right, so the group behind all of this is again the shadowy Task Force 9, which is one of these special operations unit that I guess works with the targeting and the drone program essentially, and I guess particularly in Syria here. All right, so again, as I said, one of the issues of confusion here is that, again, they were not directly, they have their own separate chain of command, which is different from central command. So, which again is why I went back to the beginning again, where the people at CENTCOM didn't know the strike was happening and said, well, those are civilians. Well, who, not only, why we hit that, but who hit that? Because again, this was its own little special unit that again was not in their chain of command, and All right. So again, the lawyers, of course, got involved, and again, question, whether said they thought it was quite likely a war crime and in violation of the laws of war. So here, they want to preserve the evidence. Reported it as a possible war crime here, violation of the law of armed conflict, and there need to be investigation, which again did not happen. Of course, it's part of why the Times is interested in this, that there's not just again the crime, but the cover-up then. Okay. All right, here we can see again from the beginning that they tried to kind of push the actual casualty number, the number killed down from, again, what originally was saying it was probably around 80 to again saying, and then trying to make the claim, it was 16, armed insurgents and then only 4 civilians, which again is, from all reports, again, it was in the number of civilians killed is 50 or higher. Okay, again, then here, and actually in this statement that the Defense Department made now, they said, they could all be essentially terrorists because women and children take up arms in the Islamic State. So, they're all lawful combatants and we can kill them. Yeah.
Okay, so...
And that little, yeah. So, they're part of the cover-up is trying to claim, and it goes on in the drone warfare program all the time. Any male Afghani, say, above the age of 16 is a potential combatant, so they count them all as not being civilians. So then, then everybody's, if you're male, if you're carrying around a firearm, which of course in Afghanistan everybody does, basically, that's that kind of country. So then they're a valid target. So we get, this is a broader issue, again, beyond just, and of course it's broad to the entire war on terror from the beginning. Okay. Again, here's another problem with the investigations that are done in these kind of cases, because often, again, it's the unit itself that's investigating itself, which again, why wouldn't they, essentially produce a whitewashed report? If you're, if you want a real investigation, obviously it has to be some kind of outside organ, part of the, internal affairs for the, has to be some kind of more independent, or maybe even outside the DoD, or you know. Okay, so again, this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Korsak, comes up over and over because, again, apparently he's one of the more important whistleblowers, and they'll discuss him and quote him several times. The Times does in the article. So again, he's one of the people that pushed it higher up again here to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then again eventually going to the Times. So I think he's one of the people who kind of put, I guess, probably because of his higher rank, he had, more credibility, of course. And here again, he talks about also personal chance for retaliation against him for exposing this. And says here directly, yes, so the cover-up involved senior ranking U.S. military officials, intentionally and systematically circumvented the deliberative strike process. They entered false entries. Again, there was a clear cover-up going on, and they did not adhere to their own regulations. Okay. All right, so he's not commenting here. But it might be one of the on-background or anonymous sources that they're talking about. Okay. So here we'll get into some of the graphics that they have on it, which are interesting. Okay, so while they're supposed to be, again, safeguards to prevent the unfortunate death of civilians, these special ops units often skirted them and ignored them. Okay, and of course, one problem is that they rarely faced any repercussions when they did wrong, essentially. So there's no check on them if they ignore regulations, or kill civilians. That there's no consequences. So why would they care? Okay. All right. So again, here's where they say again, that will be the third worst civilian casualty event in Syria. So maybe I don't know if they're including, like what the government did, what ISIS did.
Could I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure, I can.
My question is, was this Syria or Afghanistan?
Syria, Baghouz,
Okay, so
Syria.
were the civilians
This was against
Syrian?
ISIS. Yeah.
So were the casualties Syrian or Afghan?
Syrian, yeah.
Okay, were they in a territory governed or under the control
Well,
of
not under
ISIS?
the control of the Syrian government. No, this is an area controlled by ISIS.
It was
They were attacking.
ISIS. It was ISIS territory, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't Forest Hills, Queens, right?
No.
Okay, and I wish that was the largest, or even the other three were the largest, what they euphemistically called, casualties of war, or I forget what they have a name for that, that they euphemism, some people getting killed, civilians getting killed.
Collateral damage.
That's it, collateral damage, yeah, it's a very nasty, yeah. How much are those people worth? Well, they probably would have earned like $65 in their life, multiplied that was. So here's the issue. I just tried looking up the definition of a war crime, because you called it a war crime and other people calling it a war crime. And a war crime is a violation of the laws of war. The legal understanding of war crimes has been codified in several multilateral treaties, and it amounts to an attack on either a civilian or combatant who at that moment is hors de combat, in other words, not involved in combat. And also they're saying that war crimes are either in writing and treaties, or they have like not the theory of war, the customs, the normal agreed upon behavior of war, like, don't kill women and children.
Shooting prisoners.
But I mean, because domestically, I know contemporarily, intent is the most significant thing. If you hit a guy crossing the street in a jaywalk and you're not drunk, he may die and you're not going to be convicted of murder. You're just going to walk because you had no intent, because you didn't know the guy. If you hit your ex-wife crossing the street, that's another issue because there's intent. So intent is always a very significant issue. Just like in the trial of Kyle Kulinski, intent is
Not,
that question. Is it self-defense, or was he
you mean,
maliciously trying to set up the opportunity to?
you mean Rittenhouse, though?
You know, so did the drone operator have the intent to kill civilians, or was it an accident? I'm not talking about the cover.
Well, it can still be if you accidentally kill, if you basically, essentially the military version of show depraved indifference. If you conducted the strike in a way that was almost inevitable that you're going to kill civilians because you didn't have, again, the proper safeguards to prevent that from happening, or
right,
or you just you ignored proper procedures, that can be a war crime as well.
Right, and then there's one other aspect to it, which is the consequences of inaction. Like, in other words, if we didn't participate in trying to suppress the ISIS phenomena, they could have taken over a major sections of the Middle East and put it under very suppressive ruling, and lots, bad for everybody. So that's the other side of it. It's
There's
is it okay to shoot a guy?
There's a problem there, Ken, because in some cases we bombed the Syrian army who was trying to fight ISIS. So, to such an extent that people, including in the U.S. military, were joking at some point that, well, the U.S. Air Force was in fact ISIS's Air Force because of how often they were, essentially kind of almost clearing the way for ISIS by attacking, the Syrian government's army.
That degree of incompetence or intention?
No, that was clearly deliberate. That we wanted to overthrow Assad, and didn't care if ISIS took over. Yeah.
It's a mess.
Actually, let me chime in here a second about crimes and the definition therein. During the Second World War, in which I know about what a war crime, for instance, against prisoners of war, in other words, if somebody is a non-combatant and has no way of defending themselves, it is a war crime. If the perpetrators of the crime itself were not fully aware or shot or we're not fully in charge, we're not actually given the orders to do it, whoever gave the order can be held culpable by what Alex was talking about, which is that
it's also like in cases, of course, again, millions of Soviet prisoners and hundreds of thousands of German prisoners starved to death in their enemies' prisoner of war camps.
Right.
So obviously, that's if you don't properly feed a Soviet soldier and he starves to death, then you're guilty of a war crime. Yeah.
But there are degrees. So when the SS shot Canadian prisoners of war and prior to that British and later Americans, when they actually shot them after they were captured and disarmed, that would be a higher degree. There are degrees of war crimes. In other words, just like the difference between first, second, and third degree murder.
Right. Well, for example, if you had those German units during the Battle of the Bulge that put on American uniforms to create chaos and infiltrate American positions, if they were shot, that was fully in keeping with the laws of war, because you're not allowed to pretend to be the other side. Then their other side is legally able to just shoot you down if you're because you're violating the laws of war by using
if you
trickery.
violate the laws of war than the other person. That's why in one incident, I can tell you with Canadian prisoners of war, when about 35 of them were murdered and about 5 got away, but the 5 that got away said that their officer told them not to run, not to make a run for it until they started firing, actually. The Germans started firing, because otherwise the Germans had a right to shoot prisoners of war who were trying to escape. But once they started firing and they weren't trying to escape, it's a war crime.
Yeah.
So it gets into intent is also part of it. But in other words, what is an accident, etc. And remember also, that's from World War II. The definition of war crimes has also changed. But if somebody, let's say, drops a bomb on a civilian target in which there was no military target there, but they can prove that they were given intelligence that there was a military target there, that might be a mitigating factor, which is what a lot of people try to do in order to get out of being accused of war crimes.
Well, first of all, remember my sister-in-law was the first general counsel at Human Rights Watch, so she dealt with these issues until she died. She traveled all throughout the Middle East, was based in Central America in El Salvador, and that, I think Michael, I know Alex, you never really met her, but she would come to the talks all the time, and she was experiencing this firsthand as a investigator. She was the first investigator they had to go off, and she was stationed in El Salvador for 5 years. So that's all she did was deal with war crimes. And I was rather cynical when I would listen to her talk. But first of all, with this drone issue, we have not even gotten our grip around the fact that the amount of people, for example, they estimate that there were roughly 13 to 15,000 drone strikes in Afghanistan over the period of time we fought there, with maybe 900 civilians killed. Now, that is complete bullshit, because people I know told me in 1 year, in 2020, 75,000 estimated killed. In 1 year.
Yeah.
All right? So no one has gotten, all these people investigating this were actually just creepingly opening the door to what really has gone on.
Right, yeah, I mean, look at the number.
Collateral damage issue.
For 2019 in Syria, there's, again, this single strike is more than what they reported for total civilian deaths.
Right,
in Syria.
but see, there's the issue of the collateral proportionality is how they will weigh these things when they're trying to estimate applying the laws that occurred and were created after the war, particularly the 1949 Geneva war crimes. That whole definition of extending the nature of proportionality in war. The collateral damage issue, very important, because if these guys are in an area where they're gonna, you see somebody trying to take a shot at you, forget it. You're not going to be able to apply any kind of war crimes law. But in the case of these situations where you have areas controlled by ISIS, controlled by the Taliban, and then they are moving around with their armed forces, and then for some reason the triangulation of intelligence says, oh, by the way, they're going to gather at this particular spot. Well, remember, in Afghanistan, we had these incredible incidents where a couple hundred people were killed at weddings because of a drone strike screw-up. So all I'm saying is that we are on the tip of the iceberg as to what really has happened in the past 15 to 20 years. We haven't even grasped that the amount of people killed in 1 year was 75,000.
This is what they say they often fall back on: the inherent right of self-defense, to protect, soldiers in the area.
I think some of those weddings, that's a good target, because all of the relatives are going to come together. If you've got one person who's the head of a general or something, you say, oh, that's a good target. I might get 5 or 6 valuable targets.
Well, that's the kind of calculation they make. But then, of course, they'll have situations where they were completely botched it up. They killed a bunch of innocent people. And there's all these examples. I mean, look at the last drone strike coming out of Afghanistan, where those people actually worked for an NGO. I mean, so how much of that is repeated? I mean, that's what's going to be interesting to see going forward, because I doubt.
And what's interesting in this article is even apparently the CIA became alarmed.
The Biden drone hit after the 13 people died leaving Afghanistan. That's what you're talking
about. It's the issue is, like, people want to make it the Biden drone or the Trump drone or the Obama drone or the Bush drone. It's like SOP look, they've been developing UAVs ever since World War II. And they escalated during the 60s and 70s and 80s, and then after 9/11, we finally got to the point where we got the Reapers and the Predators. So the whole thing is completely different. All I'm saying is that when you talk to people who are in the know, who actually were in these programs bombing people, their numbers of dead per year is what they're estimating in the whole time we were in Afghanistan, we only killed 900 civilians, and the estimate for 1 year is 75,000 killed, and I have no idea how much is that Taliban or civilians, but that right there blows all these low numbers out of the charts.
Right. Well, here's again this graph where they show exactly where in Syria this took place,
Jim,
and then zooming in on the strike location.
Well, Jim, let me
Here
go.
again, this aqueduct that you'll see in some of the photos later.
Yeah.
So we can just quickly go.
Yeah,
through
but see, okay, Alex, the problem with that particular target, go back to that target. All right, that is in fact where they were after the collapse of ISIS. They were indeed gathering over there. That's the area where they were defending it. That's after the campaign had been mounted against them. So that's a tough one. They're going to make a big deal about that in terms of, here's where ISIS was, and, basically fuck them. They're there. We're going to bomb them, and we don't give a shit. And so that example, I think, is an interesting one. But they had surrounded those guys in that area. That's after they had really crippled ISIS dramatically. And then this whole team, this 9th Task Force, that's all guys from Delta, from the SEALs, from the Rangers. They got to the point where they were interoperating. You remember, they were operating in ways that they'd never done before after 9/11. I mean, they've gone through different permutations as to how they've actually carried out their operations. And they now openly talk about it. It's sort of amazing to listen to these guys talk about their daring do on these different podcasts.
Yeah. Here's one interesting thing you got from the article is that, again, to scan the area, they'll only use a drone with the standard definition camera. But they had a high definition drone in the area that they could have used, but obviously didn't, that might have, identified them correctly as civilians and therefore prevented the strike. So you have the issue is that dereliction of duty or was that just, an absence of mind or did they,
all right, see, the whole article presents a more complicated picture. They're absolutely the large numbers of unreported casualties, which we have yet to see. I mean, this is an example where they're essentially plastering them in an enveloped situation where they want to break their will to surrender. This is not, it's an example of, yes, them using weapons and then, killing, innocent, quote, innocent women and children who are part of their whole setup. But at the same time, what I'm saying is that we have yet to understand the depth of this. Every year in all the theaters of operation we've been fighting since 9/11. I mean, I have a feeling we're talking about hundreds of thousands of possible dead and wounded among civilian casualties. Way beyond.
They found footage from a videographer was in the area of what they think was the strike.
Matt, let me clarify one thing with Jim, and then we got to go to Steve. Jim, are you saying all of those 75,000 a year deaths are from particular U.S. military actions or mercenaries hired by the U.S.?
No, we're talking about 75,000 in 1 year due to drone operations. And how it breaks down, I do not know, but that is from someone in the know. Okay, 1 year. 1 year in Afghanistan alone. And how it breaks down, I don't know.
Okay, Steve, let's get a thing from Steve. Your perspective on the brutality and barbarism of the U.S. saving the world for democracy.
Well, I really know very little about this particular situation. I think what is described in the article, to me appears to be a war crime, but it appears to, a war crime resulting from a very weak command structure. And it could have happened under any administration, but it did happen under the Trump administration, and under an administration that when there was a conviction of a special forces person of committing a war crime because he just shot somebody, Trump pardoned him. it's not directly related to this situation, but this is of course a result of American imperialism and operating all around the world and having military operations all around the world. The 800 bases, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have anything specific to say about this. I mean, ISIS obviously is a very dangerous organization, but I'm not sure that the United States is the only nation that has responsibility for dealing with them. I don't think I have anything particularly profound to contribute to this discussion. And Jim, I'm just wondering what the next topic on the list is going to be, because I am fading fast unless it's something that I feel that I have some kind of significant contribution to make to it. I'm going to excuse myself, but so I'd like to know, after this subject has been fully treated, what's the next topic?
Well, Steve, I want to play this from Richard Wolff about what's going on with the election in Germany, where the socialists won, but also make some interesting comparisons between Germany and the U.S. And remember, we've talked about what happened in Berlin with their decision to expropriate a bunch of real estate. So he talks about what actually is going to go on there. I mean, they do have to basically write a law essentially, but it's basically going to allow through the use of eminent domain the Berlin government to basically take over any real estate company that has more than 1,000 apartments, and then turn it into public housing. So it sounds like that's what they intend to do, basically publicize instead of privatize a good chunk of real estate in Berlin to make it affordable.
Can you pump that up to full screen?
Yeah, Ken. He'll first talk about the election, and then it's not too long. It's about 6 minutes.
The next update has to do with the election.
Oh, wait.
The elections at the end of September in Germany and Austria.
Could you make it a little louder, Alex?
Lessons this election teaches us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what German politics looks like, how it's different from the United States, and what we might draw as inferences from that. First of all, in Germany, there are six political parties that struggle to win elections. None of them comes close to winning 50%. If they did, they could govern the country alone. They'd have the majority, but they don't, and they rarely do. For example, many of you know that Angela Merkel was, and to this day still is, the leader in Germany. But her party, the Christian Democratic Union, is not a majority party. So for the last many years, she's had to govern in a coalition to get up to 50% of the seats in parliament. The party she runs, which got about somewhere between 25 and 30% last time, has to be in coalition. And they were in coalition. And here comes one of the first pieces of news that the mainstream media in the United States tries desperately hard not to report. Who was the coalition partner of Angela Merkel? Who made it possible for her to be the government? Answer: the German Socialist Party. That was her partner. And in the elections on the 26th of September, they changed roles. She is now the second party, her Christian Democratic Union, and yep, you guessed it, the number one political party in Germany is the German Socialist Party. Think about it. But before you think too much, let me tell you about the government of the Christian Democratic Union. That is the major right-wing, right of center, let's call it, political party in Germany. It might surprise you to know what the conservatives in Germany do when you compare it, say, here to the United States. I'm going to read you a list of comparative statistics between Germany and the United States. And remember, it's the German conservatives who are responsible for what I'm about to list for you. Gun deaths, most recent year in the United States, 19,379 gun deaths in 2020. In Germany in 2018, the most recent year I could get numbers, 815 gun deaths. Compared to the United States, 20,000 gun deaths. Public higher education in Germany is free. The vast majority of Germans go to public universities for higher education. Tuition and fees, zero. Here in the United States, well, it's off the chart. That's why we have the debts for our students that we do. Prison population. In the United States, 810 people per 100,000. In Germany, 78 people per 100,000, right? Less than 10% of the population in jail compared to the United States. The top income tax bracket in the United States, 39%. In Germany, 50.5%. Paid sick leave. In the United States, the law mandates nothing in the way of paid sick leave. In Germany, the law mandates you must be paid 100% of your salary for up to 6 weeks of paid sick leave per year. Think about it. Annual vacation required by law in the United States, none. In Germany, you must be given, every person, 24-day work days of paid, full 100% paid vacation, plus 9 to 12 holidays that have to be paid on top of the effectively 5 weeks of paid vacation. The standard work week by law in Germany, 35 hours. In the US, 40. In Germany, every company with more than 2,000 workers has to give the workers the right to elect a little bit less than half of the members of the board of directors. I could go on. All of these things were captured, these benefits, by the socialists at various points in German history. But the conservatives don't undo them because they dare not. They can't. Conservatives in Germany would be considered Bernie Democrats or more to the left in this country. That's how different these two societies' politics are. Then there was the referendum in Berlin. This is astonishing when you think of the comparison to American politics. There was a referendum to stop runaway rents in Berlin. Rents have been going up like crazy, and the people began a movement to stop it. And the way they decided to make it stop was not this or that detailed law reform. No, a head-on demand. Every apartment owner who owns more than, I think it was 1,000 apartments, a big number. So only the very biggest landlords, and there aren't that many of them, because they're the culprits that have been raising the rents the most. They would be, here we go, deprived, expropriated of their apartments. How many were involved? 250,000 apartments would be taken away, paid for, bought at a market price, taken away from the private, run as public housing, and to make sure that rents don't go up the way they have in the past, making them politically responsible if they dared do it. This was put to a referendum. Here are the results on the election day in Berlin. Ready? 56% of the voters were in favor of taking the property. 39% were opposed. It passed. It's not a binding referendum, so now negotiations will have to begin. But it's unmistakable what the people want. And they want public housing to stop rent increases. Eminent domain was the law that allowed it in Germany. Eminent domain is part of the law of the United States. It could be done tomorrow if the political will were there.
Right. So obviously that's an interesting thought with what we've been talking about, the eviction crisis coming here and issues of housing connected to that in the U.S. Well, I mean, again, I don't see any political will like Richard Wolff says, by the Democrats to do something like that. But it would be interesting if there was an effort, you know.
Well, let's hear what Steve has to say. Let's hear what Steve has to say. You got on a mute, Steve. You're muted.
There you go. Obviously a very interesting talk, a very interesting summary by Professor Wolff. I think it should be noted that not, the bulk of the laws in Germany of social insurance were put in place by socialists, or at least with their participation. However, it's a very interesting historical note that the first elements of a national health insurance system were put in place not by socialists, but by Chancellor Bismarck in the 1880s, when he is supposed to have said the workers are revolting. And I don't know whether the word revolting has double meaning in German that it does that it has in English. But anyway, he said the workers are revolting and we have to do something for them. And so the first, what were called sick funds, the Krankenkasse, were established in Germany, which eventually became national health insurance. Obviously, every country in Europe and Japan, which adopted national health insurance in 1925, have had national health insurance for 100 years or more. The United States is exceptional in that regard. And it's notable, most people don't know this. Hitler was very interested in the health of the Aryan population. He strengthened national health insurance coverage. Under Hitler, the first national health and national anti-smoking campaign was started in 1935. Because in 1935, now we're getting close to 100 years ago, German scientists figured out that smoking was harmful to health. Hitler, it's well known, Hitler was a vegan, and so Hitler imposed a national anti-smoking campaign. So this is what Professor Wolff here is talking about is traditions in Germany, which go back over 100 years, and also every single major European capitalist country has this kind of social insurance system. The right, with the cooperation from time to time of many Democrats, has been able to prevent its institution in this country, and still, just final point, we're still not talking about establishing national health insurance here or anything like it. It's expanding Obamacare, which does broaden healthcare coverage for an increasing portion of the population, but it also provides a whole set of subsidies for the private insurance industry, which is one of the most powerful elements of the U.S. economy. Last point, the interesting comment in Michelle Goldberg's column today about language, and in essence, really, I think criticizing, I don't agree with it, with the AMA, American Medical Association, and the Association of American Medical Colleges have come out with some suggestions about what polite language would be in referring to even to opponents. But she also pointed out that the terms national health program are not included still to this day in anything that the AMA puts out. The AMA has become really a progressive organization in a number of other areas, but for example, having a non-white female president of the American Medical Association.
Steve, did it?
But almost finished. But still not supportive of a national health insurance program.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the AMA, when Roosevelt talked, I think towards the end of his last term, he talked about maybe doing a national health care, and I'm pretty sure the AMA opposed him then, and were one of the big. I think they even got Ronald Reagan in the late 40s to do ads, against socialist or communist healthcare.
Yeah,
and
let
then,
me a couple of comments on that, just on timing. Roosevelt wanted to include national health insurance in the original proposals for Social Security in 1935. They told him that if he insisted on including national health insurance in Social Security, that they would kill the whole Social Security program. So Roosevelt backed off. Roosevelt himself never tried.
Ken, I think you muted Steve.
What was muted?
I think by Steve by accident.
Okay.
We missed a few 30 seconds of what you were saying.
Oh, well, the last 30 seconds was that Harry Truman tried to put through national health insurance in the Congress in 1947. And again, the AMA made sure that that did not happen. There is a right wing, believe it or not, in 1943, an association, organization called the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons was formed because they didn't think that the AMA was being a powerful enough opponent of any form of national health insurance. It's interesting to note that the AAPS is one of the leading organizations now in the anti-vax, anti-masking movement.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, the America's Frontline, part of America's Frontline Doctors, they're a major voice in the anti-vax movement. They are an offshoot of the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons, which still exists and is still very right-wing.
Well, actually, Steve, I just have to say, first of all, I wish you hadn't used as an example Adolf Hitler.
Why not?
But the fact of the matter is, the AMA. I mean, let's face it, the AMA is made up largely of doctors. And doctors who want to make sure they make a lot of money and can charge whatever they want, which they wouldn't be able to under a national healthcare system. Right. I mean, I've heard from doctors. By the way, he was opposed to smoking because he didn't smoke. It was a very kind of his edicts were kind of narcissistically oriented, but.
But it still improved the health of the German people. I mean, there's no argument that Hitler was history's greatest Keynesian. He used public money to finance major public works. I mean, I'm not, I'm not, I'm one of the strongest critics of Hitler you can find, of Nazism that you can find, that I'm somebody who writes about the elements of Nazism in current Republican policy all the time. In fact, I wrote a very early column. A few other people were saying the same thing at the same time. But in the late 2015, I published my first article on Trump. Is he Hair Trump, H-A-I-R, or Hair Trump, H-E-R-R? So, when I talk about a few elements of public policy in Germany that were positive for the health of the people, that doesn't mean I'm supporting Hitler or fascism or Nazism. Thank you very much.
Well, absolutely, Steve, because, we have to remember that it was National Socialist and Aryan supremacy, and the benefits were to go to that part of the population
To the
at the expense of
absolutely
everybody
correct.
else. And so
Correct.
the issue of how he implemented social policy, you read Hitler's own writings and Nazism's own thought about this, and they all talked openly about how to benefit the Volk. And that was, of course, the German people in their minds. So, yes, of course, they're going to have enlightened social policy to them. And finally, the whole bread and butter issue. The main lesson that the Nazi Party took from World War I was, well, let's make sure that we strip as much food as possible from those people we occupy around Europe in order to make sure that we have a high caloric daily input for the German people to make them not go through the experience they had in World War I with a blockade. But that, of course, was aimed to provide cheap, affordable food for the Volk. So there's no argument about that. But anyway, thanks, Steve, for coming tonight.
You're welcome.
Now, what else do you have here?
Well,
Alex?
We have a bit of a prediction that basically the Democrats are already, based on current polling.
About the housing thing before you go on?
Sure, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, because when they took that vote on the housing, speaking as somebody on the front lines of the housing issue here, when they took that vote on the, we was talking about, I don't know if you would have any further information, on the housing, was because he said it's non-binding. So was that just saying, just a statement that we want more housing?
Well, no, that just means that I think the Berlin legislature now has to come up with the actual law to implement what they wanted.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
It's worth looking at further, because what do you expect from a city that has a naked nude parade every goddamn year? I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean,
they're very
Berlin.
Yes.
Berlin is one of the hippest cities in Europe right now. Everybody knows that.
That's why it's expensive. No, I was just wondering if the German legislature then is obligated to come up with
no, they are. They have to come up with a law to implement the referendum.
It's Berlin. It would be a local thing in Berlin, Michael.
Yeah. No, I gathered that. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So we have, we'll see.
Yeah, you're dumping on the Democratic Party, right, Alex? Okay.
Yeah. But based on the current polling, which is, well, to put it mildly, not good for the Democrats in the kind of generic Republican versus Democrat poll. They're down 10 points already. So, yeah. So let's see what Kyle has to say.
Looking at these new polls that just came out, it is crystal clear to me the Democrats are beyond fucked. They're as fucked can be. They're so fucked that we need to invent a new word because fucked isn't strong enough. So let's go ahead and throw that first poll up there and everybody can take a look. Generic ballot
Jim, I'm going to bid you.
51%. Democrats,
good night.
41%. This is an ABC Washington Post poll. And listen, let me put this in perspective for you, because it looks bad up front, but it's actually worse than it appears. So when you look back at 2010, which we now call the Tea Party wave, Republicans had a 3-point advantage. 3 points. Now they have a 10-point advantage. So stop and think about that. That is horrendous, because you have to understand the Democrats have about a 5-point built-in disadvantage solely because of the lack of any voting rights legislation, solely because the gerrymandering situation. You can come back to me now, Colvin, thanks. So what that means is, now it is my opinion, even if the Democrats, and this is a huge if, even if the Democrats manage to dig their way out of this hole a little bit, even if Joe Biden somehow at the last minute gets some sense talked into him and realizes, oh, I got to go big or go home. I got to eliminate student loan debt, or I got to legalize marijuana through executive order, or I got to whatever, fill in the blank, do another stimulus check of $2,000. Even if the Biden administration theoretically gets its act together, which I beyond highly doubt, even then, I think you're talking about maybe a bump in the polls for the Democrats that just gets them back to a point like it was with the Tea Party wave in 2010. So in other words, even under a best case scenario, the Democrats get obliterated in a Tea Party-like 2010 wave. Stop and think about that. So listen, the most frustrating part of all of this is I have no doubt, based on all the reporting, based on what I've seen in the media, based on the chatter in Washington, that every single person who's in Joe Biden's ear is impressing upon him this idea that the problem was that you were too ambitious. The problem was that you went too far, too quickly, and people weren't ready for that kind of change. The problem is the Bernie Sanders types and the AOC types and the bold economic agenda. The real solution is to be more moderate, more centrist, more corporatist. And of course, I don't need to tell you guys this, you know this better than anybody else. If Biden continues to go down that path of being milquetoast Joe Biden, right-wing Joe Biden, well, then he could slip even further in the polls, and the Democrats can slip even further in the polls. Because at the end of the day, the question is this: what do they stand for and what are they doing? I ask you, what do the Democrats stand for? At this late date, all we have is still Donald Trump is really bad. Okay, and then what? And then what? What's the last amazing thing that the Democrats did? And amazing is a stretch, by the way, to use that word. But they cut the $1,400 check in one of the COVID relief bills. That was a long time ago. People are like, what have you done for me lately? And of course, we still have COVID doing a number on the country. Now we have inflation that people are dealing with, and the mainstream media conventional wisdom on that is, oh, the inflation is because of the stimulus checks. The inflation is because of the rescue packages. It absolutely is not. The inflation is because of the supply chain crisis. And there's a bunch of complex macroeconomic reasons as to how we got to this point, and a lot of it has to do with the pandemic. But it's the supply chain crisis. We don't have enough goods. And so that's why you're seeing inflation. So really the solution to that, or a way to address that, it won't work in the short run, but I'm not sure anything would work in the short run to address this, is to change the way we do manufacturing in this country. We should have never outsourced all the jobs to begin with, but we should definitely, bring back American manufacturing so we have more goods here. We're not so dependent on other countries when it comes to this stuff. But of course, the media narrative is, MSNBC host Stephanie Ruhle said it the other day, higher wages is the problem. That's the problem, is that people in the middle and people at the bottom now have more money, and that's a bad thing. What? That's one of the few good things that are happening. So, listen, I don't want to overstate it, but it's looking like a bloodbath no matter what the hell happens, even if the Democrats get their act together. And I don't think they're going to get their act together. So let me throw up this next tweet here, because this one also is terrifying. New: Democrats broadly see Harris and Buttigieg as the future of the party beyond President Biden. They also see their political fortunes diverging in the first 10 months of Biden presidency. A party anxious about its future sharpens its scrutiny. Okay. Kamala Harris and Mayor Pete, they think this is the future of the Democratic Party. Well, then the future of the Democratic Party is admitting that you're losers and you're going to keep losing. That's what you're saying right there. Joe Biden is a zombie. He's basically half dead. Dog's got one foot in the grave right now. And according to a report from last week, he's going around everywhere farting on royalty. He met with somebody from the royal family and he was ripping ass in front of all of them. And they can't stop talking about it behind the scenes. By the way, side note, that's the best thing Joe Biden's done. He should get a bump in the polls like 5 points after farting on royalty. That's awesome. Anyway, so Biden, the new poll on Biden, he's at 38% popularity. 38%. That's like George W. Bush low territory right there. 38%. Well, you know what Kamala is, and you know what Mayor Pete is? Mayor Pete, 37%. And he ain't half dead. And you got Kamala Harris at 28%. So the future of the Democratic Party, those politicians are polling lower than a half-dead farting on royalty Joe Biden, who hasn't done Dickie McGee's acts in an extended period of time. How can you possibly say that this is the future? But guys, it gets back to the broader question. Do they know what they're doing? Do the Democrats know what they're doing? And I honestly, I think they can't break free from this model of the status quo comes first and foremost. Business as usual comes first and foremost. And so therefore, within that paradigm, they think, well, the left edge of the spectrum that we can go to is like Mayor Pete. You can't go any further left than that. And of course, there was that Jacobin study that just came out, which showed that the best candidates electorally are, they describe them as populist progressives. So in other words, Bernie Sanders style. The woke moderates, as they called them, polled at dead bottom. They were the worst. They were the least viable electorally. Well, what camp do Kamala Harris and Mayor Pete fall in? Woke moderates.
Okay, so that's a pretty harsh description of the Democrats that I think I somewhat agree with. But well, and maybe it's a little early to handicap them. But certainly, I think if they don't pass, I mean, it'll obviously become more true if they don't pass anything with the Build Back Better, which, yeah, depending on what the CBO scores it as, may give Manchin and Sinema a reason to vote it down. And then what happens?
Alex, I have something very simple to say about this kind of young punk asshole bullshit.
Okay.
I mean, this guy, what are the numbers on Capitol Hill? They only have 3 Democrats edge on Capitol Hill in Congress. They have an absolutely even Steven. Yeah, him too, Richard Wolff. He can go to hell too. They have an even Steven situation with the Senate. So what is he talking about? What and then remember, I guess Kyle Kulinski must have done a really vigorous op-ed piece when the Iron Wall got defeated in a vote on Capitol Hill, and then of course the whole Congress came back and only 6 people voted for it.
Right.
To have this funding. So, yeah, fine. So what's his argument? Everybody should push Bernie Sanders' arguments to the point where the poll showed what happened. I mean, the American public is not in some sort of pre-revolutionary consciousness. Whatever people on this show might say, the facts prove that the case.
Right.
So Kulinski can stuff it with his bullshit, because I'd love to sit there. Yes, the Democrats are in a hard place. Yes, indeed. And what did we see? We saw the contradictions of trying to pass these bills go on for months. And they're going to go on again for months. Who knows what's going to happen when it gets scored on Capitol Hill? They'll probably knock some more money off of it. So, I just don't understand what this guy's saying. Does he not have a concept of where the public is in general? It's certainly not in the camp of pushing his politics. And it's as simple as that.
And let me just add one other thing here, where he said that the Democrats are fucked. Well, if that's the case, and the Republicans still tie themselves to Trump, then what he's saying is the United States is fucked. And I agree. It's kind of like a defeatist attitude, which is to say, hey, we're fucked. So let's just go have a beer because tomorrow we die. I mean, that type of attitude is fine. And if he thinks he's going to push the progressive candidates by that, I mean, let's face it. I mean, the vote, the presidential vote in 2020 was a vote against Trump. It wasn't a vote necessarily for the Democrats. The Americans have to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future. They're always, as we saw from the prior report, they're among the most conservative conservatives. I mean, American conservatives are among the most conservative conservatives in the Western world, or among any democracy. Let's put it that way, if not the most conservative conservatives. And this is the American people. And I agree with Jim that you're not going to. I mean, what I think Jim is saying is that a lot of these people are misjudging what the vast majority of Americans think or believe or want or anything like that. We're not, it's not a country of enlightened minds who sit on a hill thinking about, the most ideal, possible situation, where in other words, where everybody has equal rights and equal pay and equal this and everything like that. And no, I mean, it's a pretty narcissistic country now. I mean, this is not the America of post World War II.
This is a narcissistic, kind of spoiled brat country. And again, I don't think they're going to say, "Oh, okay, well, let's just, let's throw up the most let's throw up AOC, and she can beat any Republican candidate." That's pipe dreaming.
Yeah.
So
look what happened. Look what happened when they stuck the knife into Sanders during the primaries.
Yeah.
When all those people in Klobuchar pulled out, when what's his name in Texas pulled out, when Buttigieg pulled out. I mean, they basically all pulled out after South Carolina because they were afraid that Sanders was going to win. And frankly, I don't think Sanders could have beaten Trump, whatever you say, because they based this on simply looking at the polling data that shows the popularity of expansive social programming, and I don't disagree with that. But when you work it out into the practical politics of how the structure of American politics is right now, we've been watching that since January. We've been watching that unfold in vivid, living color since January, and we're going to keep on seeing it. So yeah, there's part of what he says is probably right. They are fucked, but how fucked and why they're fucked, I don't necessarily. I think he's just coming in with his, predisposed biases.
Okay, so one last thing I thought we should do. We have a little bit of time. Wanted to go into here. What's the upcoming elections in Honduras?
I had something I wanted to do, but go on. I'll let you go do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Go on.
All right. So again, the elections, presidential elections will be held on the 28th of this month. And so the current polling shows basically the opposition, the candidate Xiomara Castro leading 38 to 17, latest poll. Of course, whether that's going to be the result is an issue, because of course there was a lot of fraud in the last two elections in Honduras, in favor of the government essentially. That even the OAS actually acknowledged. But it appears that, if they would have a fair election, that the government would lose and that left-wing coalition would, become the new government. So whether that's going to be allowed to happen is another question. So that's something we can, follow at the end of the month. And again, there'll be. Among Hondurans themselves, you can see here, they expect there to be fraud in the election and social unrest after, the government is fraudulently reelected, essentially. The interesting thing about the candidate, Ms. Castro, is she's the president of the former President Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted by the U.S. in a coup. That directly with Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, directly involved, and of course, with the approval of President Obama. So, that just shows what kind of forces the left is going to have to worry about there too. And Jim, it sounded like you had something you wanted to bring up.
No, that's all right. It's 10:45, and anyway, you just brought my blood pressure up with Mr. Kalinsky.
Okay. I'm glad we can still bring it up, Jim.
Anyway.
Yeah, we don't have some other people on the air, so we could have a real big fight right now about that. But anyway, Kenny, you have any last comments?
You got to unmute, Ken.
Good night and good luck.
Okay. And you've been listening to Going Viral News. We were joined with Steve Jonas tonight. We have Ken Aaorn in California, Michael Jankowitz, myself, Jim DIngeman, and Alex Stavoulopoliz in New York. Good night and stay tuned.